This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert.
In the name of God, source of all being, incarnate Word, and Holy Spirit. So today, the gospel is about money and stuff and treasure, and just what does it mean to be poor or to be rich? The parable of the rich fool brings all of this to mind. And just as a sidebar, greed is not only a huge sin, it actually, in some ways, outranks even sexuality. You know, there's Christians who think the Bible's all about sexual issues, and there's some stuff in the Bible about that that's important. That's about this much. But the Bible has this much about money, possessions, poor, use of money, misuse of wealth, that much compared to this much. That ought to be a clue, but it often isn't. I'm mindful with this parable of a cartoon I saw years ago. It showed two people at a gravesite in a cemetery. Obviously, there'd just been a gravesite service. And behind the two people, lined up one after another, were huge moving vans, just huge moving vans, one after another. And one person says to the other, "He always said he wanted to take it with him." We know, and it's a cliche in our culture, that, you can't take it with you. We know that. So we have this rich fool. Why is this person a fool? Well, for starters, he really doesn't understand that all good things come from God. It's not about what he got or what he did or how skillful he was or how fortunate he was or how wise he was in his business. All good things come from God. He has no sense of that whatsoever. Even those who would say, well, but I put my nose to the grindstone and I went to school and I got trained and I did this and I did that. Even the will and the motivation to do the things you need to do to pull yourself up, even those things are gifts from God. Not everyone has that. Now, the second thing is that he was very foolish because all of this was being saved up for himself. There's no reference here to, hoping to help other folks. It's all about him so he can eat, marry, drink, and be die, and have parties and all that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with saving or having reserves, but in this case, it's all about him being able to party. He's also a fool because he's out of touch with the reality of mortality. We don't live forever, and you have to remember that. And how you spend that time and how you use your treasures is very much affected by how much time you have. And he thought he had forever to eat, drink, and be merry, and suddenly his number came up on the computer, and he's out of there. So whose will it be? And then, of course, the obvious part is there's no indication here whatsoever that he was about to share any of this abundance with anyone else. I'm remembering some years ago now, I think in the 80s, an announcement came out in the news that Chrysler Corporation was going to lay off something like 500 workers in December, just before Christmas. Merry Christmas. And a couple days later, as it happened, it was also in the news that the CEO of that corporation was making as a salary $25 million. And this is back in the 80s. And as luck would have it, the gentleman in question was caught by a reporter somewhere in the streets of New York and interviewed, I'm sure reluctantly. And the reporter asked, well, your corporation just announced layoffs just before Christmas. And it's out there in the reports that the CEO, yourself, sir, you make $25 million. What do you have to say about that? And I still remember exactly what he said to this day. Well, that's the American way. Really? Whether it is or it isn't, it's certainly the greed way. And in any event, it's not God's way. I don't have and God does not give us a formula as to how much money someone should make. That's not the point. The point is, this person is a fool, as far as God is concerned. Now, the opposite of that, another memory, I once interviewed the Navajo bishop of Navajo land. He was the first Navajo person to become a priest and later bishop, Stephen Plummer, in Bluff, Utah. I was considering going to work there. And I remember Stephen said, and the Navajo reservation is the opposite of 25 million of anything, at least as far as dollars goes. And he said, in the reservation, nobody cares how many sheep you have, but they sure care about how you share the sheep you've got. That's what matters. That's what Navajo people notice. So then we have at the end of this gospel the admonition to be rich toward God, the opposite of this fool. And that's pretty easy to figure out. For one thing, a rich person in God's eyes is someone who knows where all this stuff comes from. None of this stuff is because I did it. No, it's all gift. And the only proper response to gifts is to be thankful. Meister Eckhart once said, if you said no other prayer ever in your life, thanksgiving would be sufficient. Thank you for the gifts you have. That's sufficient. And by the way, thanksgiving is an antidote to greed. And then the second thing we can note is that someone rich toward God would certainly share that abundance in appropriate ways with those who don't have abundance. No, there's no formula, there's no rule. That's a matter of you, the Spirit, and the person in need, how you sort that out. But you understand that part of the reason you have abundance, if you do, is it's meant to be shared with others where appropriate. Thirdly, a person rich in God knows that mortality is a reality, that God by design does not have us to live forever. And given that time is limited, that has a dramatic impact, or should, on how we live, how we function, and how we use the treasures, the money, the resources we have. And lastly, someone who's rich in God sort of knows at some level that there is no point in putting all your energy and anxiety into hoarding all kinds of stuff because you're anxious about your security. You sort of know that if you put your energy toward the will of God and do the things you're called to do, the basic needs will be taken care of. You'll be all right if you're putting your energy where it belongs. Not in, my God, I better build it up because I'm feeling insecure. There are circumstances and conditions where that gets challenged, even for people who are very faithful, and then we have to be mindful of that, and that's where the rest of us in our abundance comes into play. If someone has a bad break or a lost job or a disaster or a hurricane or a tornado, there's times when we have to adjust that and help each other. But that's the whole point of being rich. The problem is that money, treasure, whatever you want to call it, can very easily become an idol, idolatry, a false god. Our culture is especially inclined that way. The Western world is. The capitalistic thing, make money, go ahead. And it's not that money or being wealthy is sinful. The problem with wealth is that there are very bad side effects. You can very easily begin to think it's all about you and what you have and what you got. Perhaps you've heard the term the gospel of prosperity. There are people out there who claim Christianity who think that if you just do the right things and you're faithful and you send them a donation, you will become rich and prosperous and your business will thrive and all will be well you'll have all kinds of money if you are faithful to God. It just doesn't work that way. We know that. There was a wonderful story years ago about a Baptist lady, a widow, who was raising 4 kids on a basic, simple, everyday salary, just barely making ends meet. And being a faithful Baptist, she gave her tithe to the church every week, faithfully. And the elders or deacons in the congregation, out of compassion and well intentions, prayed about it and felt the Lord was leading them to go to Sister Brown and tell her that she could be relieved of her tithe. They knew as she was struggling and had 4 kids to raise, it was really tough, and they wanted to give her a break and help her by relieving her of having to give money to the church. So they went and knocked on the door and shared this information with Sister Brown, and then sort of sat back with sort of anticipating, that there would be some relief and gladness. And what happened? She burst into tears. And she said, in effect, you have just taken away from me one of the last places where I had some dignity, the ability to give. You're trying to take that away from me. At least I could give at some level. And I suspect, I don't know this part of the story, but I suspect she kept paying her pledge, treasurer's note. But that woman, that widow, whatever her simple menial job was, that woman was incredibly rich before God. Well, the problem with money is it always attaches to emotions. We both want more money, we need more money, and yet we don't want to talk about it or to deal with it either sometimes. Like the policeman who was sitting for his oral exams for sergeant, and he was asked a question like, all right, if you were dealing with a crowd, what would you do to disperse a crowd? And the police candidate thought for a moment and said, I think I'd take up a collection. That'll scatter them. Works in church, especially in the fall. Our relationship to all of this stuff is very complicated. And we have lots of possessions. It's a cliche, we're a materialistic society. We really are. In gross levels, we are materialistic. But the problem is not that we have possessions. The question is, do you possess your possessions, or do your possessions possess you? And if you're not sure what that means, I suggest you might try moving sometime, and you'll discover your possessions and who is in charge here. And of course, if you've been burglarized, and many people have, you know what that's like. You not only lose things, you feel violated, and you realize you had some real attachment to some of those things, some of which can't be replaced. Perhaps like you, I know some people who have lost their homes in an instant in a fire here in Southern California or elsewhere. It's all gone in a half hour. And you suddenly get in touch with the issue of possessions and stuff. The comedian George Carlin, who's probably not everybody's favorite comedian, but he didn't always swear. He has a great rap, or had a great rap, on stuff. We have houses, so we put our stuff in. Then we have to get a bigger house because we have more stuff. And then we get rid of some of that stuff to get more stuff. And then we move, and then we need some more stuff. And then we decide we need even more stuff, so we sell more stuff, and we give it to the rummage sale because we need more stuff. And on it goes. And there is such a thing as hoarding, by the way. That's a psychiatric condition. Stuff. We have so much stuff. And the issue is, what is the nature of our attachment to that? Well, in church terms, I think one of the pieces of advice would be, don't give till it hurts, give till it feels good. And that goes with all kinds of giving. No one's asking anyone to give till it hurts. That's dumb. Give till it feels good. That's being rich in God. I think this story may have shown up earlier. I have a funny memory. This story's been told already, but it's a really great story about the lawyer, the priest, the businessman, and the doctor. And the businessman had really been very prosperous in his business, had made lots of money, was very pleased. He had no family, no one to leave it to. And so in gathering with his three friends, the lawyer, the priest, and the doctor, he said, what I'd like to do, I know it's crazy, but I want it to go with me. I want it to be, so I'm going to give you my cash. I'm going to give you each $50,000. And when I die, which will be soon, and you have the wake and all that in the casket, I want you to, if you would, put that money in the casket so it's with me. They thought it was a little weird, but he was a good, dear friend, and you do what friends ask when they're terminal and so forth. So they all got $50,000, and sure enough, the businessman died, and they went to the wake and the funeral, and they all went up like others and did their thing and slipped the envelope into the casket. And the service was over, and they all went out to lunch because they were long-term buddies. And they're sitting around being pretty morose and melancholy, and you would think, well, their friend just died. But finally, the doctor speaks up and says, I really feel bad about this, but I got to confess. We've been trying to get this free clinic going downtown, and they needed radiological equipment, and I'm a radiologist, and they were falling short in the fundraising, and it was really a matter of really urgency of getting that equipment, and I got to tell you, I gave $25,000 for that. I feel kind of bad, but I needed to do it. And the priest goes, well, I got something to tell you too. I've been working with that homeless shelter in our city, and they've been desperate for funds. No one's giving enough, and they needed to redo the facilities, and there were rent issues, and really having some financial struggles. It was under threat, and I ended up giving a good portion of my cash to that. And the lawyer looked at the two of them, shook his head. So, I'm really ashamed of you guys. I put in a check for the entire amount. Well, the good news of the gospel is that, as it says in our epistle today, we are neither Jew nor Greek, Scythian or barbarian or slave or free, and we're not either rich or poor. God couldn't care less what's in your bank account or how big your house is. He could care less. But I think you can say what God does care about is how and in what way we share the abundance we have received. In a strange sort of way, in our gospel of Jesus, which totally turns everything upside down and is totally countercultural to the greed of our world, where Jesus has said, in order to find your life, you must lose it. Those who lose their life will find it. Totally countercultural, totally not materialistic. In that world that we live in as Christians, what that means is that whatever size house you have, whatever's in your bank account or your reserves or your CDs or whatever, if you want to, you can become incredibly, filthy rich. It's very simple. You give away. And the irony in the gospel economy, it is an economy, is that the more you give, the more you get. And you become incredibly rich in this world, to say nothing of the world to come. Amen.